Hey, kids. Sorry, Dr. Moss couldn't be here today. I'm his evil twin brother from a different mother. So I'm going to be taking over for a while, so pay attention. No crap from you guys today. Okay. Okay, you have to know the rest of the material. That's it. Goodbye. No, hold it. Stop. It's really me. It's okay. Sorry, it's the medication. I think it's the medication. Oh boy. Let's see what happens. Whew. I'm feeling better now. There we go. So, hey, how you doing? Monday. I believe Dr. Dunham's in there with you today. If you have any registration problems, he's the guy to talk to, but not during this lecture. This is a important lecture here, the last one that you'll have before the exam on Friday. Wednesday will be, I'll be getting a review assignment to you. Well, you should have seen it already. I've gotten that to you over the weekend, I hope. And so we'll go from there. Ooh, it's making sense. All right, so let's get into this stuff and take a look at where we finished up. I believe we finished up looking at the coracoacromial arch and this shoulder impingement stuff. So a little review tells us that the impingement involves primarily rotator cuff muscle, or the rotator cuff, in particular the supraspinatus. So here you can see this anterior view of the scapula. So anterior view of the scapula, this is going to be the subscapularis. So this is deep to the pecs, behind the ribs. And so this is the subscapularis muscle, the anterior muscle of the rotator cuff. And here you can see it blending in with this tendinous cuff. And it's called a cuff because it kind of surrounds, it cuffs over the head of the humerus. And on the, excuse me, on the posterior aspect, you can see the posterior rotator cuff muscles, the infraspinatus, from below the spine of the scapula, infraspinatus, and this teres minor muscle. And then on top, right on top of the supraspinous fossa, we have the supraspinatus muscle again. So those are the rotator cuff muscles. Sometimes, again, remember, known as the sits muscles, where you have the supraspinatus, infraspinatus, and teres minor posteriorly, and then go to the anterior surface of the scapula, and you'll see the subscapularis muscle. So the rotator cuff muscles, generally known as the group of muscles, the sits muscles. Well, we're going to take, we looked at their individual functions last week. Last week. So now we're going to take a look at how they work together as this rotator cuff, and how they work in functional activities. So in function, let's take a look at them, and you'll see here the infraspinatus and the teres minor. Actually, the angle of pull, the way the fibers are running, the angle of pull is medial and down, and they're wrapped to the head of the humerus. So they're actually going to pull the head of the humerus down on that glenoid fossa to the inferior part. So if this is the glenoid fossa is right here, here's the head of the humerus, those muscles will want to tend to pull the head of the humerus down this way. And similarly with the subscapularis, you can see the subscap also has this medial and downward pull. So you might say, wow, is that good or not? Well, really, if you want to avoid this coracoacromial arch and shoulder impingement, you want these muscles to pull that head of the humerus down. Does that make sense? Yeah. So you want these muscles to pull that down so that when the strong deltoid, and so the deltoid comes up over the top, would come over the top of this acromion process and the coracoid process, and it inserts down on the deltoid tuberosity. I'll show you over here too. So see this little, the arrow pointing here, the deltoid comes up over the top and inserts down here on the deltoid tuberosity. And its main function was to abduct. So it means it's going to pull the humerus up into abduction, abduction. Well, the rotator, what the deltoid will do then as it tries to do that, it's also going to try to pull the head of the humerus up. Because it inserts down here and originates up here, when it contracts, it's not only going to try to abduct, but it's going to try to pull the head of the humerus up. Well, that's not good. When it pulls the head of the humerus up, that means it's going to try to jam this tendon from the supraspinatus underneath that coracoacromial arch. And particularly, it will try to jam into this here's the coracoid process, coracoacromial ligament. And this ligament really is kind of sharp. It's on its edge. So as this gets pulled up, this coracoacromial ligament will impinge on the supraspinatus and start maybe wearing away the supraspinatus, causing injury to the supraspinatus, not allowing it to work as it should. And then also that would affect, because it affects this cuff, what attaches to the cuff? The subscapularis, the teres minor, and the infraspinatus. They all attach to that cuff. But if the cuff has been damaged, that's going to affect how those muscles work efficiently. I'm sorry, Dave Matthews, you and me together, these structures to work right have to all be in good working condition. So the function of the rotator cuff is really to try to depress or hold down. This is the whole rotator cuff working together, primarily subscap, infraspinatus, and teres minor. They're going to try to hold that head of the humerus down so that when the deltoid does its job, it will not bring the head up, but it will allow that to pivot and then come up normally to abduct that shoulder. The supraspinatus, as we said earlier, works to initiate abduction, just helps initiate it, but then that gets the deltoid working to do the main work. All right? Now let's put it into a more functional context yet. So let's see, what do I mean by that? I mean that this rotator cuff really plays a role in any type of throwing activity, whether it's serving a volleyball, serving a tennis ball, throwing a baseball, throwing a football, throwing any type of implement, using my smelt dipper in lacrosse and trying to fling the lacrosse ball. This motion here, this throwing motion, is really controlled by the rotator cuff, and it's initiated by bigger muscles. The pec major, the anterior delt, the latissimus dorsi, all help internally rotate the humerus to create velocity and force so that the arm can throw. So the bigger muscles cause that to happen. But and this is internal rotation. So what types of muscles would control that? If I'm looking at concentrically internally rotating, what type of muscle would control that? Well, the controllers would be those muscles that concentrically externally rotate. If they externally rotate, they control by eccentrically controlling internal rotation. So that goes back to that eccentric concentric principle. The eccentric activity of a muscle is controlling its opposite concentric activity. So look at the teres minor and the infraspinatus. They laterally rotate concentrically. So then eccentrically, they would control the opposite. So they would control medial rotation. So why is this important, this control of this activity? Well, think about it. We've got these big muscles, the pec, the lats, that are moving the arm forward. Well, if nothing slows that down, the head of the humerus would literally try to be pulled out from its socket with each throw. With each throw, it would be trying to be pulled out of its socket. We know that there's weak ligamentous components to this area. So the muscles, not only do they provide the movement, they really help with stability. Well, the muscles that would help stabilize this posterior aspect here, are these infraspinatus and this teres minor. But look how small these muscles are if you'd compare those to the pec major and the lats. So every time you throw, these muscles are trying to decelerate the arm. Well, over time they'll weaken, particularly if your lower body's not helping absorb that force too. When I get back, we'll go over this, and I can demonstrate this a little bit more. But these muscles really are struggling to help eccentrically control the internal rotation. So functionally, what do these muscles do? They want to try to control the internal rotation, and they want to try to hold the head of the humerus down so that during abduction, there's no impingement on the supraspinatus tendon or part of this upper part of the rotator cuff. And I hope that makes sense. The other thing I wanted to look at just briefly here was what is frozen shoulder. I have that here, and frozen shoulder is when you get no, it's not when you get frostbite. Frozen shoulder is commonly seen in elderly, people my age, if you don't use the shoulders. And it's really, the technical term is adhesive capsulitis. Adhesive capsulitis. I'm going to try this here a minute. So, adhesive capsulitis. So this is where the capsule that surrounds this synovial joint gets inflamed, hence the itis. Adhesive, did I spell it right? Adhesive, I think I did. And then what happens is that it loses its ability to secrete synovial fluid in the area. It limits that ability. By limiting that ability, the capsule adheres to the structures around it. And when it adheres or adheses to those structures, it does not want to move. Hence, it's often called frozen shoulder, because the person will not use their glenohumeral joint. They'll try to lift their entire scapula. They'll be using their traps and their rhomboids to try to get motion. Oftentimes they'll complain of not being able to reach up to get into that upper cupboard. And the problem is not so much the joint of the bones, but it's where this capsule has not been used. And if you don't use it, it's not going to secrete synovial fluid because it doesn't think it's needed. And it develops into this adhesive capsulitis. Not a lot of fun. Hence, again, if you're working with geriatric patients or you know some geriatric folk in your family, try to get them to maintain mobility at all costs. Or not at all costs, but it's an important thing to do. Okay, let's move on to the muscles of the arm. Now, these are called muscles of the arm but really they work on the shoulder as well. So that's why I'm going to look at them briefly here. The biceps brachii. The biceps, interesting, it's biceps brachii. Brachii refers to the humerus. This muscle has no attachments on the humerus. It attaches on the coracoid process and the top of the glenoid fossa, supraglenoid fossa. So it attaches on up there. Then it goes down to the radial tuberosity and the ulna. So it will go all the way down to the radius and ulna, crossing over. We know it's a strong flexor of the elbow, where it flexes the radius, but because it crosses over the shoulder joint anteriorly, it will also help flex the humerus. It will also help flex the humerus, coracoid and supraglenoid fossa. We'll see that the short head of the biceps inserts on the coracoid process, the short head. And then the long head inserts on the supraglenoid fossa. I think we can see that back here. No, we cannot, but I will show you here. So here's the humerus, and up the humerus there's this intertubercular groove that runs between the lesser tubercle, which is medial, the greater tubercle, which is lateral, and in that groove is the long head of the biceps. Runs into that groove, goes right over the top, and inserts onto the superior part of the glenoid fossa. That's the long head of the biceps. The short head of the biceps inserts on the coracoid process. Here we see two other muscles inserting on the coracoid process. What are they? What's this one? Huh? What do you think back there? Yeah, this is the pectoralis minor. Now here's another muscle. Oh, we haven't studied this one yet, but let's see if you can figure out its name. It goes from the coracoid process down to the humerus. Coracoid process to the humerus. What's another term we've been using for the humerus? Brachial, brachii. So this is actually the coracobrachialis right here. Well, the other muscle that we have inserting on the coracoid process will be the short head of the biceps. The short head of the biceps will be superficial to this coracobrachialis, and it will run down, meet right about mid-humerus with the long head of the biceps, where then it forms the biceps brachii, and then it continues down. So the long head of the biceps inserts on the supraglenoid fossa, the short head inserts on the coracoid process. And you probably saw both those things in lab last week. If not, you'll see them tomorrow again. Oh, we also just mentioned the coracobrachialis off the coracoid process, inserting onto the medial mid-humerus. Both of these muscles were innervated by the musculocutaneous nerve, one of the terminal branches of that brachial plexus. And this muscle, based on where it's located, helps to flex the humerus, but because it's medial, let's go back here and take a quick peek. Because it's medial, it will also help adduct. You can see that it will help adduct as well as help flex because it's in front of the shoulder. All right, coming down. The last large muscle in this group is posterior, and it's the triceps. Now, ceps means heads. It's Latin for heads. So here's a three-headed muscle. The bicep was a two-headed muscle. The triceps inserts on the infraglenoid fossa, the inferior component. Then it has two attachments off of the humerus, the superior posterior humerus and the inferior humerus. They all merge together and attach on the proximal olecranon process. Okay, let's see if we've got a view of this up here. I'm afraid we don't, but let's see. Yeah, let's see here. Yeah, here we go. Here we go. So this is part of the triceps, and this is the long head. The long head. This is going to go up, and it's going to insert on the inferior part of that glenoid fossa. This is the glenoid fossa. Inferior part's down here, and only it's going to be posterior. So that's the long head. Then we have the lateral head and the medial head. And the medial head is deep to this long head. Hopefully that's where I have it written up down here. The infraglenoid is the long head. The superior humerus is the lateral head. And the inferior humerus is the medial head. And they all go down. And we know that they extend the elbow, but what will they do to the humerus? Because they cross the posterior aspect of it, they will help extend the humerus. And then the last muscle we'll talk about, very small muscle, and it attaches on the back of the humerus. This one will not affect the shoulder, so we'll talk about it more when we talk about the elbow. But it's on the posterior humerus running to the olecranon process. So here's the posterior inferior humerus, and it's going to run to the olecranon process, the big bump on your ulna. And we'll talk about that more when we talk about the elbow. See, it assists in extending the forearm. It has nothing to do with extending the humerus. Oops. I'll put an asterisk by that statement. I'll tell you why later. All right. Hope you're hanging with me on this stuff, because we're basically done with the new material. I've got a couple things I want to hit on here, and that is, again, making sure you understand the arteries in the shoulder area. I believe that you've taken a look at these as you looked at the brachial plexus last week, but again, be able to draw these arteries from where they come off of the aorta and how they branch and actually end up down into the wrist. You should be able to draw that out for me, or for yourself, even better. So the axillary artery, well, it's kind of starting in the middle here, but the axilla is the armpit. So we have an axillary artery right here. It's kind of a key landmark to the brachial plexus. And what does this axillary artery, what role does it play in that brachial plexus? So we'll take a look at that in a minute, but let's see where it originates and how it works. Well, even though this paragraph here kind of starts in the middle, let's just start with the aorta on the heart. The left side of my chest is my heart, and coming off the heart I have the aorta. And coming immediately off the aorta, what branches over and comes to the right side of my body? Yeah, the brachiocephalic trunk. I have the brachio going to my arm and cephalic going to my head, trunk. So brachiocephalic trunk will come over, and immediately off of that brachiocephalic trunk, I have the common carotid running up my neck. I have the common carotid. And then adjacent, as the common carotid branches up, I have the right subclavian artery moving to the lateral aspect of my body. And that right subclavian runs underneath the clavicle. And as it goes underneath the clavicle, it will continue until it gets to the pectoralis minor. When it gets to the pectoralis minor, it becomes the axillary artery. And the only stretch of this artery that was once called subclavian, now called axillary, is under the pectoralis minor. That's the axillary artery. When it comes out from behind the pectoralis minor, it's now called the brachial artery because it's by the humerus. The brachial artery will continue on down until it gets to the antecubital fossa, and where it branches into a radial artery following the radius and an ulnar artery following the ulna. On the left side, it's a little different because there's no brachiocephalic trunk. So after the brachiocephalic trunk, I get the left common carotid, which goes up to my left side of my neck and then up to the brain. And then I have the left subclavian artery, which follows the same path that we saw on the right side. Left subclavian goes to the pec minor. Under the pec minor, it's the axillary artery, comes out from under the pec minor, and now that same artery gets a new name, the brachial artery, and then that brachial artery comes down and then again branches into the radial and ulnar arteries of your forearm. So very, very important aspect there. The brachial plexus. So here's the deal on the brachial plexus. All this page here is to try to help you understand the 5 roots, the 3 trunks, the 2 divisions, the 3 chords, and there are actually more than 5 branches, but you only need to know 5 branches. I think Carol succinctly explained this as she drove you from Kalamazoo to Detroit, and the number of lanes in the highway, with the median always being there. Median, medial, nice, huh? And so forth. So anyway, this is for your own edification here, hopefully. Some of these branches, you see, it's review. For example, you know that the dorsal scapular nerve goes to the rhomboids. Well, technically, it's also a branch. And a branch means that there's nothing else that comes off after it. A branch is a terminal branch. That's where the brachial plexus will end with those sets of nerves. And we have the long thoracic nerve. Where did the long thoracic nerve go? What muscle? I'll give you a hint. When this nerve is paralyzed, the person will end up with winged scapula or a winging scapula. What controls the scapula and that winging component? Serratus anterior, right? Serratus anterior. There's also a little nerve to the subclavius. There's the suprascapular nerve that goes to the supraspinatus and infraspinatus. And you know that from knowing those muscles. The lateral cord, the branches that come from the lateral cord are the lateral pectoral. Don't need to know that. But you do need to know the musculocutaneous. And then also the lateral cord will set a branch to that median nerve. Off that medial cord, we have another terminal branch that the ulnar nerve goes on to. And then also the posterior cord has 2 terminal branches, axillary and radial. So get to know these things, draw them, practice them, quiz your neighbors. This is so on the exam next week. You'll have to draw half the brachial plexus, and this is what I do. I'll say starting with the top 3 roots, draw and label each successive part of the brachial plexus. That's all I'll give you. So for example, you'd have to, if I said start with the superior 3 roots, you'd have to start by drawing C5, C6, and C7. That's what you'd start with. And you'd label those roots. Then, as they come out, after we come to the roots, real trainers. We have trunks, and here we have a superior trunk, and this, it becomes the middle trunk. So you label this area here where these two nerves come together, the superior trunk, and you'd continue C7 out. And where it's inferior to the superior trunk, it's called the middle trunk. Then, here's where the tricky part of the drawing comes in, is from the superior trunk, you get a component that goes to the anterior division up here, and then back here, you get a component that goes to the posterior division. Similarly, from this middle trunk, we'll get part that will come up here to become part of the anterior division, and then another part that continues as the posterior division. Where these two anterior divisions come together, we get the lateral cord. Where these two posterior divisions come together, along with this one, we get this posterior cord. Now we knew the posterior cord has two terminal branches. One is axillary, going into the axilla, and the other is the radial nerve. The axillary nerve and radial nerve. Coming off of this superior, or off this lateral cord, the lateral cord will branch into the musculocutaneous nerve, which will handle all the flexors of the elbow, and then also will send a branch over here to the median nerve. So you'd have to label all those things and draw and label all those things I just mentioned. If I said, starting with the superior, 3 roots. If I said start with the inferior 3 roots, you'd do the same that I just mentioned, be able to draw and label these things. So the deal is, on Wednesday, there's no new material. However, you're to come to class. I want you to meet with your teams. As painful as that is, it's making you stronger. So I want you to meet with your teams and to go over with each other and to take it on as your responsibility. You will not let a teammate leave until they can draw the brachial plexus and label it all correctly. It's not your responsibility for you to know that. It's your responsibility to make your teammates know that. And hence it's their responsibility to make you know that. So the team takes care of its teammates. You and me together. I think that's all I've got here. If you have questions, boy, feel free to email me. I'm tired of doing these videos. I mean, I think I am up for some type of Oscar Mayer Wiener Award for one of these, but I'm not sure which one just yet. Hey, I love you guys. Have a fantastic day. And unless Dr. Dunham's got something for you, if you need to meet as a team, think about meeting as a team. But get to know this stuff. And I think I'm done rambling for the day. Fire up.